Breaking news of the boogeyman Jaron Ennis striking again. They say he's not a boogeyman, but nobody is willing to step up to the table. So he got to be the man. The boogeyman. Well, news came out today that Brian Norman turned down his third offer to fight Jaron Ennis in a unification. The first offer was for $1 million. The second offer was for $1,250,000. And the third offer, according to Eddie Hearn, was for $1.5 million. Now keep in mind, Brian Norman last fight, he made $100,000. That's Brian Norman's biggest payday so far. And guess what? Eddie Hearn offered Brian Norman 15x his biggest payday to fight Jaron Ennis in a unification, the fight he was asking for. Even then, Brian Norman turned down the fight. To make matters worse, according to Dan Rafael, Brian Norman will now defend his WBA title versus Derrieck instead on Keyshawn Davis' undercard, who's a contender. Basically, Brian Norman went from being the main event to fighting on an undercard. As a champion, he's fighting on a contender undercard instead of fighting Jaron Ennis on a main event for way more money. Now, you got to make it make sense.
Do you know what? It's frustrating because you hear everything that Brian Norman Sr. or his daddy's saying, and none of it really makes sense. If this is a really simple situation. The first offer that was made to Brian Norman was nicely over $1 million. They said that they felt that, not insulting, but was nowhere near. We've made two more offers, $250,000 every time now, to levels that Brian Norman will never see. And it's like, we keep getting told we're close, then we go back and make another offer, and then we're told by his team that we're actually not that close. And I start to think, Brian Norman, do you want this fight, or are you clout chasing, or as the others might say over here, cap, or whatever it is?
Not sure how that works, but
not sure it is either. But it's like, do you want to be great, Brian Norman? Like, not being funny, who is Brian Norman? I know Brian Norman's a good fighter, but no one knows who Brian Norman is. We're giving you a bucket load of money and an opportunity for you to unify the division against, in my opinion, one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Now, you say Boots is overrated. You say he's not the bogeyman. Then why wouldn't you take this bucket load of money to prove that you're the best welterweight in the world? So let's just stop with the interviews online. We've gone back 3 times now with more money. To a point, with all due respect to Brian Norman, he shouldn't be making this kind of money. But we're ready and we're prepared to pay him it. And then we get told, oh, you're miles off. It's like, we just saw an interview with this guy saying we're right close. We've just gone back with another $250,000, and now you're telling us we're miles away. So I don't believe the bullshit of Brian Norman and the team. If you want the fight, you would have taken the fight. And now, we're in a situation where the IBF, which is absolutely ridiculous, has ordered Trudezian to fight. The rematch. Listen, the kid's a good fighter. Boots has already beaten him. The IBF have got to stop with this. They're ruining boxing by ordering fights that people really don't want to see, especially when he's already beaten him. So we may vacate the belt and we may do something different because Boots has got to prove to the world how great he is. We may fight Trudezian and we might just get it out of the way.
Without a doubt, this is a bad look on Brian Norman's behalf. Jaron Ennis called his bluff. You see, if Brian Norman turned down the Jaron Ennis fight for his biggest payday, we talking about approximately 15x his biggest payday, in order to fight Terrence Crawford instead for 50x his biggest payday, then that would make sense. Or at least a unification fight with Stanionis or Mario Barrios, then that would make sense to why Brian Norman is not fighting Jaron Ennis next. But to turn down the Jaron Ennis unification to fight Derrieck on an undercard for way, way less money, that doesn't even add up. The math is not mathing. Now, Brian Norman's father came out stating that all they want is more money. $1.5 million is not enough to fight Jaron Ennis in a unification. Well, first of all, they can try to get $10 million to fight Jaron Ennis. I wouldn't be mad at them. However, you have to make it make sense. If Brian Norman, his last fight, made around 100K, it's going to be hard to demand anything more than 1.5 million. He has to keep building his portfolio before asking and demanding for that type of money. You see, if Brian Norman really believes in himself, that he can beat Jaron Ennis, that he's not there just for a payday, then take the biggest payday for a unification, beat Jaron Ennis. That way you put yourself in position to make 3 million or 4 million your next fight as a unified champ after beating Jaron Ennis. That's how you do it. That's how you build your profile. But realistically speaking, Brian Norman father can't ask for 3 million like Jaron Ennis got paid his last fight, because Jaron Ennis was a main event and he sold 15,000 tickets in Philly all by himself. Meanwhile, Brian Norman is fighting on an undercard, on a contender undercard, Keyshawn Davis. Clearly, they don't have the same pull when it comes to their stardom. Both fighters have different leverages. Additionally, Brian Norman's father originally said that he talked to Bozy Ennis, and Bozy didn't want the fight right now. He wanted the fight for undisputed. Well, the way Brian Norman's father has been talking as of late, it sounded like he was speaking for himself, because for a fighter who made 100K his last fight, he's demanding for some undisputed type of money to fight Jaron Ennis, even though this fight is not for undisputed. And Brian Norman is only bringing a belt to the table that he won because Crawford vacated the WBO belt. Now, we all can agree, if Top Rank offered Brian Norman 1.5 million to fight Teofimo Lopez, Brian Norman will accept that fight in a heartbeat. In fact, he already did, and Teofimo Lopez was the one who ended up turning down the fight. You see what I'm trying to say? Clearly, Brian Norman is not keeping the same energy with Jaron Ennis, because if he did, he would have had accepted the fight like he accepted the Teofimo Lopez fight. Unlike the Teo fight, Brian Norman is treating the Jaron Ennis unification fight like a payday instead of an opportunity. However, when it comes to the Teofimo Lopez fight, he's treating it as a payday and an opportunity. The reason why is because Brian Norman is confident that he could beat Teo, but he's not confident that he could beat Jaron Ennis. And that's why he wants a huge payday to fight Jaron Ennis. To each his own. However, it's disappointing to see Brian Norman fight Derrieck. And it's also going to be disappointing to see Jaron Ennis fight his mandatory that he already beat, instead of fighting each other. With that being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe below. And to be continued on the next episode of Akhi TV. Peace out. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.